Rise of the Golden Idol is the sequel to The Case of the Golden Idol, a game that we played just last year on the channel. And shortly after we covered it on the channel, the sequel, this game, came out. I was super excited to check it out, but I just got a little bit busy with other things I was working on, but we are finally here, and I am super excited to take a look at this game. Both of the Golden Idol games have a pretty cool look at different kind of point-and-click adventure style games with the puzzles that you're solving and the scenarios that you're looking at. The gimmick of the first game being that it was centered around the titular Golden Idol, and there was always a murder that you were trying to solve in each chapter. But will this game be the same? I guess there's only one way to find out. The tutorial provides us with a quick and easy way to get reintroduced to how this game works and the couple of changes that they've actually made from the first game. You get presented with one of these point-and-click adventure type screens where there's all sorts of little things that you can interact with. Interacting with things gives you words that you can then use to solve things like people's names or what actually happened in the event, most of the time surrounding someone dying, like this prison guard nurse guy right here. I would say that the main difference between the original game and this sequel is that the original primarily took place in an ancient civilization, whereas this one feels a lot more modern. Though the ancient stuff isn't completely gone, as we see this guy named Oriel Toussaint is actually a professor of ancient Lemurian history. We also earn the achievement Constriction for finishing the tutorial chapter. Oh hey, and look at that, the TV is running a little information about Lazarus Hurst, the main character from the first game. The first real case that we're going to need to solve is called Academic Impact, and it really feels like things are right back to the first game as we immediately see a corpse in front of us. The first thing that I do in pretty much every case that offers it to me is to first go around and click on all the different things, at least get all of the things that there are to see in your mind, and then if there are people that need to be named, I go through and figure those out first, because normally you're going to need those names to solve the end puzzle anyway. The game is definitely making an attempt to ease you in at the start of the game. The first puzzles are never super difficult, and this one is no exception. The couple that pulled up in the car found this man named Isaac Nowak who had fell from the bridge above, which killed him, obviously. And we earn the achievement Academic Impact for finishing that puzzle. After each case you finish in this game, you also get a note to look at. These kind of vary in quality. Some are very clearly connected to what you just played, and some of them are a bit more of a stretch, but you know, it's a puzzle game, so it all kind of relates eventually. The other thing that you get access to between cases are these overall stories. This game is broken up into 5 chapters, and each of them have one of these overarching stories that you need to complete. And you don't have all of the information until you play all of the individual cases. So I guess we need to go gather some more information, and the best way to do that is to head into the next chapter, Under Construction, where we immediately see that a man has been crushed underneath a pipe. But that obvious crushed body isn't actually the only murder that's happened here. Looking in the pipe that got knocked over, we find a man that has long since passed with a dog tag that says Luke Brown, and a note in his pocket talking about coming down to the docks. These things surely won't come up later, right? The first thing to take note of here are definitely these 3 big machines that all could have been used to knock this pipe onto this other guy. These construction workers are obviously master criminals though. They would never leave some evidence in the thing that they used, like a mug that says Best Bill on it. Anyway, the first step to figuring out how to untangle this mess these master assassins have left is to figure out who everybody is, which is actually pretty easy because we're still pretty early on. In the end, we determined that maybe my spidey senses are a little bit off. This wasn't an intentional murder, the foreman was just trying to do a rush job on removing the pipe so that they could get to a sports match, and the rush job resulted in his untimely death and also the discovery of the body of Luke Brown, something that they probably wouldn't have found otherwise. We also earn the achievement Under Construction. We're gonna get an achievement at the end of every chapter, you can probably get the gist of it. Returning to the Between Cases TV sets, we find another cryptic note that we don't really understand, and we unlock a little bit more of the story, but we're still not quite there as far as solving the whole thing. The final case of Chapter 1 is called Newsflash, the sudden announcement of a sinister cult, so this is really where things are gonna get going. We start out seeing that the police that were investigating the construction area mystery have been called into a press conference with the police commissioner. There are a couple things being talked about at this press conference, the first being the death of a famous scientist that we actually saw in the first case that we took on in this chapter, and a new demon-worshipping drug cult that the police are calling the Red Curse. A lot going on here. Isaac Nowak's family have come to grieve on live television, I guess, and just announced that they will not be pressing charges. I guess that's to say that he wasn't murdered and he just slipped off the bridge and fell, but this whole thing feels a little bit suspicious to me. Checking out the police station's morgue, we see a couple of different bodies that are presumably related to the things that are being discussed outside. Finding a note that says one of them died from blunt trauma to the back of the head is another big clue. The commissioner's office also has the case files for some of these people down in the morgue, including Luke Brown, who was claimed by the Red Curse. Step 1, as always, is getting these names jotted down, and they're still pretty easy at this point in the game. This was the first case where I got even a little bit stuck, but it was just because I was misreading the case files. But that being said, this won't be the last time that me misreading something stalls me out for a bit. Based on the information in the case files, we find out that Isaac Nowak was actually a victim of the Red Curse. The police chief was about to announce that until Isaac Nowak's daughter stepped in and bought him off, convincing him to announce that his death was just a tragic accident. Okay, so it feels like we've at least got our feet kind of under us here as we earn the achievement Newsflash. After finishing that case, we get some more notes about the evidence that we were looking at in the last chapter, and a list of people that are known to associate with some of the victims of the Red Curse. Notably a guy with a cool name, Hunter Wolf. That probably won't come up again. With the information that we have now, having solved all 3 of the prior cases, it's pretty easy for us to uncover that the basic bribery plotline of Isaac Nowak's daughter is what was going on here. Except we now have a little bit more information that neither Isaac Nowak nor Luke Brown appeared to be drug users, which doesn't really work with the Red Curse theory. Another name that keeps coming up is the Steelside Warehouse. Turns out that somebody from there is actually the one that influenced Isaac Nowak's daughter to stop the investigation. It'll be a little bit before we get back there though, as we earn the achievement The Curse for wrapping up the first chapter. That takes us to Chapter 2, The Pursuit, and the first case of which is Garden Retreat. Oh, look at that, it's just a nice lady tending to her Zen garden. Maybe this will be a nice one. Ah, no, there were actually 3 people that were supposed to visit her house today, and she actually killed one of them. So I guess this isn't a nice easy one, we actually have to figure that out now. Ugh. Looking inside of her safe, we find that she has been constructing some sort of strange artifact as well, which is a little unusual. I mean, I guess this is a Golden Idol game, so maybe it's something to do with that. We also learn that she is apparently the historian for something called the Harmony Foundation, probably going to be relevant. This is another pretty straightforward case to solve. Based on all of the clues that we're finding around the area, we find out that it was her colleague that was coming to visit her. But he suddenly actually tried to rob those artifact pieces that we saw up in the safe, and of course she had to fight back for those. The thing that I was missing is I said she sprayed him with pepper spray when it was actually hairspray. My bad. Solving that earns us the achievement Garden Retreat. On our way out of the garden, we stumble upon a book about Lazarus Hearst and the Golden Idol. In the first game, we learned that the Golden Idol had some super powerful abilities like providing a long extended lifespan. It seems like most people don't believe that anymore, but this historian we met just previously does not agree. The next chapter is called Behind Bars and takes place in yet another prison. This is probably my second favorite level in the entire game, to be honest with you. We have a list of prisoners and a number of empty cells. One of the prisoners broke out of the prison, so we've got to figure out which one that one is. The prison break was clearly not just the actions of one man though, as we find a note that seems to be detailing some sort of hidden plot to break him out. And it doesn't help that one of the security guards named Percy was inadvertently helping this guy build his way out by providing him with art supplies in his cell that he definitely shouldn't have had. Outside of the prison in the yard, we get a look at all of our inmates that are still here, and we also learn that Jeremy's got a honker. Oh yeah, he really does. Inside the guard's office, we find a list of 5 prisoners, conveniently the ones that we're dealing with. I guess they might be the only ones that live in this entire huge building, maybe? Forget about those other 10 windows that are underneath them. I really love the puzzles like this where we're on a full new cast of characters that we haven't met previously and trying to figure out who is who. I just think it's a lot of fun, and this chapter was no different. The next challenge this level gives us is needing to decode the secret messages that were passed along from the outside. Initially, when I was looking at this puzzle, I was trying to read it like a clock, but it's actually a lot more simple than that. You're just taking the number and the color that relates to it above and relating that to the circle down below to get the hidden message. After the chapter is through, we figure out that the missing inmate is named Arthur Blythe, and he escaped using help from someone on the outside named Stephen Aria. Neither of these are characters that we've met before, as far as we know, so I guess we're going to get more into these people in the future, but for right now we earn the achievement behind bars for finishing up that case. The next case is called Blockbuster Release, and we start very hot as we immediately see a car that appears to have blown up at the showing of a new movie. This movie theater, though, is of course not just a regular one. They have some special technology that they use in their projector where they project the film through a blue crystal that just makes things a little bit better. The movie being shown is some sci-fi thing, which has everybody in the place cosplaying and has us absolutely primed to be missing out on some key suspects. That is, until we find a couple of guys talking about the plot that they're working on with an empty duffel bag, so I think maybe we got 'em, boys. Inside the manager's booth, we find a photo telling us that someone named Augie Tameen has been banned from the theater for life, and I wonder if that's somebody in cosplay outside. Moving towards the entrance to the theater, we find that the theater manager has crashed a truck into someone that was attempting to leave, saying that no one leaves for some reason, which gives us our death in this chapter. This also made me realize that nobody actually died in that prison chapter, which feels a little bit strange. Oh hey, and would you look at that, Augie Tameen is actually the guy in the super green alien costume that you really can't see the face of. Who would have thought? Ah, okay, so I've figured it out now. Based on the signs that we see in the projector room, the crystal that was being used was actually red, but the blue one that we see in the projector was switched out by Augie Tameen. He then quickly painted the red crystal and slotted it into a hidden compartment in his costume as one of the teeth of the alien. It actually turns out that the car fire was a completely unrelated incident involving a bet between 2 other patrons, and then when people saw that fire, they started to flee out of the theater. Then the theater manager noticed that the projection had gone all weird from the crystal getting switched out, so she made the executive decision to put a stop to that. And figuring all of that out earns the achievement Blockbuster Release. Moving right along, the next case is Going Once, a shocking murder at the Seven Seas auction house, as we see just a pretty regular auction going on actually. Nothing weird here yet. The current item up for bid is actually one of the masks that appears to be just like the ones that we found in the original game, so looks like there are some ancient artifacts here. The weird part of this level occurs when we interact with the clocks in the top right-hand corner of the screen. The time doesn't move that much, but it appears to be much darker in the room, though there are still people there, so we'll deal with that in a minute. Upstairs, we find a security guard and a weird little goblin statue type looking thing. This is once again pretty normal until we click on the time jump forward and see someone being electrocuted up here. So yeah, that's the murder, I guess. This is another pretty cool chapter. The way to figure out who each person is in the bidding war is to go through who bought what based on the auctioneer's ledger, other than the familiar face of the historian that we've met previously. The next piece of the puzzle is to figure out what each of the items that are being bid for are and who actually won them in the auction, which is pretty easy once you have the names down. With some helpful context clues coming from the story paragraph provided, we are able to determine that the historian Tessa Navari was outbid for the statue by a woman named Da Silva. But Tessa really needed that statue for whatever her plans with the golden idol are, so her and her associate, the guy working the bar at the auction, decided to steal the statue instead. But when the associate got caught, he was forced to kill the person using that electric box as we saw up above. Wrapping up that case also finishes out this chapter for us, and that unlocks the end of chapter puzzles, including a corkboard and another story we need to figure out. We finish out those puzzles and earn the achievement The Pursuit for figuring out that Tessa Navari has actually been working to reassemble the golden idol. She broke a man named Arthur Blythe out of prison because he knew where the parts were, and together they got all of the parts gathered up and ready to be assembled. But then at the end, Arthur Blythe tried to betray her, which resulted in his death that we saw at the beginning of the chapter. With Chapter 2 wrapped up, that of course takes us into Chapter 3, The Machine, starting with the case Ignition. We start out in the back rooms of what seems to be some sort of laboratory. We've got a lot of lockers with different members of staff's personal belongings in them, as well as a lot of random fingerprints dotted around the place. Stepping inside of the next room though, the calm aura outside definitely fades away as we see an experiment has definitely gone wrong, catching one member of staff on fire as several other members of staff are arguing about whose fault it is. We find one of the scientists' lab notes hanging out, which seems to suggest that whatever they're working on is extremely dangerous, and we also learn that someone named Mr. Marmot was actually banned from the laboratory for some actions that he took previously. We get the names down of everybody in the lab, and honestly we're late enough into this game that I would normally skip this step, but we're going to be sticking with this cast of characters through the entire rest of the game, so it's worth throwing it in here. Once we have all of the names, we go back through all of the fingerprints that we found and figure out who matches up to who based on what they've been interacting with recently, and then we need to take those and look at the controls to figure out who actually interacted with the control that set poor Eugene on fire. What a surprise, it was himself. This puzzle was actually a little bit of a stumbling block for me, but eventually I managed to figure out that the team was working on whatever their scientific project is when Eugene used it without approval, which caused him to get banned from the laboratory. Then, when Tim and Marie tried to re-enter the lab for the day of showing off what they had been working on with the big higher up, Eugene attempted to sneak in behind them and use the machine again, setting himself on fire. Classic Eugene. And we earn the achievement Ignition for finishing that up. Case number 2 of Chapter 3 is called Protest Movement. A hippie circle refuses to roll over. Seems a little bit weird given that we spawn in definitely like a suburban America looking area. No hippies to be seen here. Okay, there we go. When we click into the next screen, we see a group of hippies protesting outside of a building, and when we click on that building, we see the scientist from the last chapter, Mr. Nowak, is hanging out, looking out at all of them. Turns out that that is essentially just the plot of this case. The protesters have gathered outside of the new OPIG laboratory, and they're upset that the Harmony Foundation, where they used to hang out, has been closed down. During the protest, one of the hippies attempted to steal the bird bath back from the foundation, which resulted in it rolling down the hill and falling into that neighborhood that we saw earlier. I actually forgot one thing about this game. Whenever you finish up the main mystery of any given case, it goes ahead and moves you to the next case. So I went back and finished up the part of the case that I missed, which was the ice from the bird bath's path as it came down the hill into the neighborhood. And with that knocked out of the way, we can go ahead and head into the next case, which is called The Procedure, and we can see that things are once again starting off very hot. We see a security guard bleeding from the arm, a man passed out in a chair, and a woman hiding in the corner. The man in the chair and the woman in the corner both have notes in their pocket from Tessa Navari inviting them to the Harmony Foundation for the first ever New Dawn procedure. That seems a little ominous. we appear to have gone slightly back in time to the point that the OPIG took over the Harmony Foundation. In the other room, we find that Tessa Navari hasn't taken the news super great and is attempting to repeal the OPIG folks with her idol that she has built now. Obviously, that doesn't really work though. Figuring out what Tessa hoped her idol would actually do is the first step, so we need to figure out what some of the symbols that she's been using actually mean according to her. The procedure that the Dedicants were invited to take part in was seeking to eliminate hatred and replenish empathy, which would result in enlightenment, which was Tessa Navari's goal with the idol in the first place. When the security guards attempted to grab one of the Dedicants, they got stabbed by the cousin of that Dedicant, which resulted in the entire events of the chapter proceeding as they did. We earn the achievement The Procedure for finishing up this chapter. After wrapping that case up, we go back and find some more lab notes, and it seems like some of the scientists actually have some ideas for what they can use Tessa's technology for. Seems like maybe she was just a little bit off and they can actually utilize this statue after all. With chapter 3 wrapped up, there are a couple more story things that we need to figure out, starting with the hierarchy of the people in OPIG. The main thing that I was missing out on here is that Eugene, the guy that caught himself on fire, actually somehow ended up being the laboratory lead, so I must have missed something. We'll ignore that for a second though and go back to figuring out the overall story of this chapter. At this point, I've realized that we've been seeing things a little bit out of order, and the events that we saw in Ignition with Eugene lighting on fire were actually occurring after the lab had been re-seized from the Harmony Foundation. And the last little bit of story that we saw for this chapter involves actually figuring out where Eugene's promotion came from. He thought that he had set the device to take hatred, but he had actually figured out that it is giving heat, which set himself on fire, and then the owner of the laboratory was very impressed by his gumption, or whatever old guys say. This results in us earning the achievement The Machine for finishing up this chapter. That leads us into chapter 4, The Trials, and the first case, which is called Feathered Frenzy. This chapter takes us inside of a zoo aviary, and I've got to say, I'm a big zoo guy, big bird guy, but this chapter itself is a little bit filler, I must say. We see that one of the attendants named Declan has been attacked by birds though, so at least it's going to be an exciting one. The thing that stands out the most here is definitely this bright yellow bracelet that one of the birds is carrying away from the body. Definitely something to keep note of. Step 1 is of course figuring out all of the names, but this chapter's a little bit different. There's only 3 humans, so it's mostly bird names that we're figuring out, which is a little funny. We'll just skip right to the end of this chapter. We find that Declan walked into the aviary with his bright yellow wristband on, which one of the birds took a liking to and grabbed off of his wrist. This distracted him as he stepped on some eggs that were in a nearby bush, which seemed to anger the mother of those eggs. Then his cries of pain set off the other birds, which attacked the other animal keeper. And we earn the achievement Feathered Frenzy. That takes us to the next case, Backstage Drama, at the Stardust Variety Hour talent show, and there seems to be a little bit of a falling out over where some certain people got placed. While looking through all of the people that are actually involved in the talent show, we find that the winner is actually also holding one of these bright yellow bracelets with the weird symbols on it. A coincidence? In my puzzle video game? No, it couldn't possibly be. We have a list of contestants and a list of acts that were performed, so it's relatively easy to figure out who was doing what and get those put together for all of the names. Once again, I really like this chapter. There was a lot going on and a lot of hints with what was happening with all of the people's names and the acts, and there was an order, and the order got switched at one point, and I think it was a lot of fun to figure out. But once again, I think that this was another pretty filler-ish chapter, though it is building to something. The missing piece to the story that I was missing is I actually had the previous winner named Little More, which is probably not going to be correct. There was a lot of interpersonal drama between the contestants, which we could get into, but honestly none of these people are coming back in the future chapters, so it doesn't really matter. But we do earn the achievement Backstage Drama for completing the case. That leads us into the next case called Spiel Dance, and just kidding. Actually, the winner of the contest is being broadcast live on TV, directly into the home of one Mrs. Da Silva, the woman that won the auction in the earlier chapter of the game. She appears to be watching at rapt attention with a book open about a dance guide. She is on the phone with her uncle and seems a little bit confused on how this random guy on TV learned how to spiel dance, when apparently it's an ancient tradition that takes a really long time to master. She's a historian, so it makes sense that she would know about things like that. Definitely a different puzzle for this game, but I don't hate it. We actually need to go through the book that she has out in front of her and decipher the meaning of the dance that Arthav was doing in the talent show. This earns us the achievement Spiel Dance, and it was pretty simple, but it's definitely super different, so I don't hate it. That leads us into the next case of the chapter, Complex, which is absolutely my favorite case in the game. We see ourselves looking at a big apartment complex, and we have all of the names of people that live in the different apartments, but we need to figure out who is who's got what going on, and it's just classic deduction. And it's definitely not going to be boring. I mean, immediately we click into the laundry room and see a guy with a knife in his pocket that appears to be cleaning blood off of his shirt. One apartment also appears to have the notes of someone that became unemployed and needed to seek some quick cash, so they signed up for some experiments at a nearby laboratory, and now they have someone else in the building's memories? Yeah, that seems about online with this game. There's also a security guard who is absolutely sweating bullets on what appears to be a first date, maybe? The fun has to get ruined though when we stumble across the body of the owner of the apartment who has been struck down with a gun in his hand, and looking in the trash can of the room, we find another one of those mysterious yellow bracelets. Alright, it's starting to become a pattern, we're gonna have to actually acknowledge it. After thinking about it for definitely way too long, I realized that this guy down in the laundry room doesn't really make sense unless he's living with someone else in the building. And that's when I remember that there was a baby that had knocked spaghetti all over the floor in one of the other apartments. So that's not blood, it's sauce, you clever game. As always, once we get the names down, everything else starts to fall together pretty readily. The apartment building had a picnic event where the security guard threatened the owner of the building because he had been kind of stalking one of the other tenants, that woman that he had been on the date with. But when the owner of the apartment and that other woman that lived downstairs with all of the notes about the mind switching went into an experiment, they had some of their memories swapped with each other. That led to the owner forgetting about the threat and continuing with his stalking actions, which would eventually get him killed by the security guard. That of course takes us to the end of chapter puzzles that we need to solve, including figuring out what some of the different symbols mean now that the Harmony Foundation has been removed from the project, and also figuring out what's going on with these people that are switching memories, who actually has whose right now. Luckily for us, there are some pretty easily accessible notes around the chapter that we can use to figure out what these symbols mean. I got a little bit hung up on the directions of the arrows. For some reason I thought they were going back and forth instead of all just going one direction, but after correcting the mistakes that I made when I was putting it together the first time, we managed to get the entire grid of whose memories were transported where together. That includes some memories going into data disks, which is another element that we'll have to think about for the future. That takes us up to Chapter 5, the final chapter, and the first case, Beach Trip, which sees us return to the cast of scientists that we've seen quite a bit already. This is definitely a weird scene considering what we've seen the scientists up to before. Eugene is now overseeing some models advertising an orange drink, and we see that Mr. Marmot has taken the idol on the road, so seems like they've figured out a way to mobilize to the beach for whatever reason. Stepping inside of the paramedics' van, we find a casting agent along with 2 paramedics and the third model for the beach shoot who appears to have had some sort of negative reaction to something. The paramedics seem to think that it's drug-related, but she claims that that's not possible. Conveniently, the paramedics also happen to have some notes laying around that detail all of the hot new drugs that are going around in today's youth. The first thing to figure out in this chapter is actually trying to pair out the 3 models of the drinks along with their portraits that were passed along to the hiring agent. Again, this is pretty different from other puzzles that the game has done, so I don't hate this at all. We get the models paired out, but the thing that was actually preventing us from completing the level is that I messed up the names of the paramedics and had them switched, so we go ahead and correct that, and that's names knocked out. After that, we earn the achievement Beach Trip for finishing up the chapter. So the idea here is that the models were hired to make an O-range commercial, but the casting agent actually spiked the drink with a drug called Euphoria to make them super happy. Then Mr. Nowak aimed the idol machine at the models to take their happy memories. Kind of a convoluted way to do it, but I guess so. That takes us to the next case, Boardroom Brawl, and it sure is. We click in and immediately see some higher-ups at OPIG fighting for some reason. Clicking into the other screen, we are once again back with the whole OPIG main crew, and we see Tim Spender seems a little bit confused and has a ticket to the Love Motel in his pocket. This is gonna be super relevant for later. Based on the clues that we've been given and Tim being confused and the two women fighting in the other room, it's pretty easy to figure out the plot here. A presentation was being done to show that the idol could take and give memories, so the team chose to take 1 day of memories from Tim Spender and give them to Eugene. The memories from Eugene were then broadcast onto the main screen for all of the people watching the presentation. Though, unfortunately for Tim, his wife was one of the people watching the presentation in the other room, so he got a little bit exposed there. Seems like the plan was only to take 1 minute of his memory, but Eugene decided to shoot from the hip a little bit. Between the cases, we see some notes from the different members of the lab with different ideas they have for how the idol can be utilized with its newfound functionality. The next case is called Ancient Artifacts, as we see the return of Jack Nowak and also Miss De Silva as the main operator of this museum. It appears that the idol was being used on someone here at the museum, but they requested to get more memories from whatever they were observing. And a quick look at the calculator in Jack's pocket seems like he may have adjusted the calculations a little bit to make that happen. Luckily, De Silva was also recording some conversations from whatever was going on moments before we stepped into the room. It appears that someone was given the memories of an ancient figure named Echo Seconda, and when they pushed for more memories, he seemed to not get super happy, maybe a little bit confused about where he was, like we've seen before. Once we have the actual story sitting open in front of us, we can figure out that the associate of Jack that came along on this mission was Oriel Toussaint, a name that we've seen previously in this game. Additionally, the plan was originally to only transfer 1 month of memories, but at Oriel's request, they decided to try to multiply the effect, which didn't really work out well. Looking at an ancient guide, which is actually pretty easy to understand, and then looking at the final story of the area, we can realize that you are actually able to take the entire being of someone's personhood if you use the idol multiplied high enough. So the entire personality of Echo Seconda was transferred into Oriel's body, which of course caused him to freak out a little bit. Completing the museum leads us directly into the Steelside Warehouse chapter, which is a little bit unusual. This place was mentioned quite a bit early on in the game, but we haven't heard too much about it recently. This is a hub for a lot of the local homeless population, but there is also some devious stuff going on behind the scenes, it would seem. The guys that live here seem to have all gathered together, and they're discussing someone that has disappeared recently. We also see the return of a familiar name from earlier on, Hunter Wolf. After we've combed through the outside area of the map, we decide to take a look at what's going on inside the actual Steelside Warehouse, where we immediately find a corpse. Great start. We don't find anybody else in the area, but we do find a journal from someone named ES who talks about starting a new life and talking about how Wolf has earned their full loyalty. We also find yet another convenient board with photos of all the people that live in this community and a list of all of the names. Though that list is labeled potential options, which is a little ominous. The other half of this level is equally weird. We click out to a ship out at sea, and we see a note talking about some sort of live streaming equipment type thing, and we also see some extremely rich people on their own private boat playing a game of charades. Luckily, the vast majority of people in this group actually have something in their pocket that has their name on it. Seems a little bit weird, and with the clues from the charades game, we're actually very easily able to identify who is who. We're also able to access a camera that sees the level from above, where we can see someone walk over to the musical equipment and spill a drink on it, which seems to fry it. It's a little bit more difficult to figure out who the homeless guys are, but we're able to figure it out based on the area that they are living in. And with all of the names filled out, the only thing left for us to do is figure out what occurred in summer and autumn, which is a little bit daunting because there are a lot of blank spaces on these storyboards. It turns out that this Hunter Wolf guy has been experimenting within the Steel Side warehouse using the idle machine that we've seen previously. A guy called Elijah St. Clair showed up and was giving a lot of people around the area trouble. So Hunter Wolf took the memories from a guy named Luke Brown and gave them to Elijah St. Clair, essentially replacing him. An interesting thing about this game is that I have no idea where this is occurring in the timeline compared to the other stuff that we've seen so far. Yet, at least. The event that occurred out on sea at Autumn is another pretty similar situation. The live broadcast that we saw the note for is actually being used to take the form of Gabriel Gerard, the rich guy that owns the boat, with another one of the local homeless population named Harry Stone. Then the musical device was ruined to try to avoid everyone at the party realizing this guy had no idea what he was doing on a musical instrument. However, after the case ends, we see a note that they both failed again, along with 2 messages about some high-powered executives failing at things that they've previously excelled at. Seems like the plan of replacing high-powered people with the local homeless population hasn't gone super well for whatever it's going to be. The final puzzle for this chapter, The Pinnacle, involves solving basically a knowledge check quiz. A lot of the information here has been covered throughout the rest of the game, and all that I'm doing is compiling that information about how the idol actually works into one place. The thing that I messed up on is the comic picture where you need to flip around the images on how the idol works to change people's brains over. Which makes sense because that was honestly the thing that I was the shakiest on, but we earned the achievement The Pinnacle for completing it. Completing that puzzle actually takes us to a kind of unusual cutscene for a big sports match that's about to happen that honestly seems kind of entirely unrelated to what we were just doing. So how are they going to wrap this up? Maybe we'll wrap it up with a final clash. That's right, 5 chapters that lead to this, a multi-part level that will see us go through quite a bit more content. The first scene sees us back at the OPIG laboratory, where everybody is hanging out, and they have a very strict list of tasks that they need to get done. Apparently the idol is being delivered to the TV station for some reason, and everyone has super strict instructions on what they need to be doing when they need to be doing it. In one room of the lab, we find Tim Spender, who appears to have a bottle of that orange drink that smells like rotten eggs, which seems a little unusual, but okay, Tim. Once we've seen everything there is to see at the lab, we can exit out of that area and skip forward in time to the next scene. In this scene, we see that the idol has definitely hit the road with the security guards looking to transport it, but one of the security guards is throwing up in the back, which seems a little strange. The final scene sees the idol get delivered to the TV station, and then we need to solve what was actually happening here. It turns out that the OPIG Corporation has been entirely working to increase O-Range's sales, and the way that they've decided to do this is to broadcast that Happy Memory drink commercial that they recorded at the Pale Finals. Okay, so it's been a corporation this entire time. I definitely didn't see that one coming. Once we wrap that mystery up, we get to see another day of events. This time is when Eugene began his ascent through the company, trying to pass Tim, referring to himself as head of speculative investment, which makes Tim not super happy and maybe willing to betray him a little bit. So that gives us Tim's motivation and allows us to solve the next puzzle that we've been given. The idol was loaded up with good memories of the O-Range, but Tim replaced it with his memories of the Eggy O-Range, which then affected the security guard in the truck, and so his memories were sucked into the idol as well. This opens up the plans for November 8th, where we see the Hunter Wolf plotline begin to be looped in, with his assistant being killed right next to the idol. But that's not actually quite what happened. At initial glance, it looks like Luke Brown was killed by the security guard, but actually Hunter Wolf used the idol to take Luke Brown's memories once again and transport them into the security guard, once again giving him a new body. With that established, that takes us back to the 4th time slot on December 16th. The idol has arrived at the TV station and subsequently been pushed through a window. There's also a man hanging from the top of the radio tower, and that guy on the motorcycle that's actually the cover of the game. That's neat. Clicking upstairs, we see that the people that pushed the idol out of the window appear to be Tessa Navari once again, who had allied herself with Jack Nowak. They managed to get the idol out of the window before the broadcast happened. After that, we go ahead and head up to the roof to take a peek at who is hanging from the tower that we saw before. Turns out that it's Eugene Marmot himself. He realized that things were going south, so he ripped the video display out of the tower, because that's how that works, to stop the bad O-range message from going out. There's actually one more twist though here. The bad O-range message did manage to go out, but exclusively to Jack Nowak, the other person that was in the room at the time of the broadcast. I didn't figure that out until we were doing the final puzzle though. I kind of expected that to be the end of the game right there, but there is actually one more chapter we need to look at on December 4th. We return to Hunter Wolf and the security guard Luke Brown as we find them at the bridge overlooking where that scientist was killed at the very start of the game. After a quick return to the police press conference chapter of the game, I realized that Jack Nowak is actually the cousin from that chapter of the famous scientist who died. I didn't realize this the entire way through, and it definitely would have helped me understand what was going on here. Jack Nowak's main goal as a scientist was to educate humanity, and what better person to educate humanity based on than the legendary scientist Isaac Nowak. But when Eugene pulled the plug and changed the plans of the idol, that just turned Jack Nowak into his uncle, Isaac Nowak. Kinda confusing, a lot of Nowaks in there. This is also where we earn the 25th and final achievement of the game, Final Clash, and we can officially say that we have done everything in the Rise of the Golden Idol. We get a final cutscene where we see Tessa get arrested, Eugene get promoted, the two other scientists get fired, and Oriel Toussaint, or Echo Secunda, escaping from somewhere, I guess the wreckage of all of that just occurred. And one final cutscene with a video that Jack recorded for his uncle once he took over the body. We also see that the idol has been buried to never be used again, unless they decide to make another sequel to this game, which I welcome, by the way. We also get one final line of dialogue that Jack tried to make the changes in the world he wanted using the homeless population, but they all failed, so he had to make the ultimate sacrifice himself, killing his uncle, in order to bring the power to everyone else in the world. So how did we do? The Rise of the Golden Idol took me a total of 11.3 hours, so a couple hours longer than the first game took me. Place in ancient times, so there was a lot of trying to figure out what people were even talking about and kind of a knowledge barrier there. Whereas this one was a bit more modern and things were just a bit easier to understand overall, though, once you incorporate the idol stuff, that kind of all goes out the window because that's obviously not really related to anything. And that being said, I also definitely much prefer the more modern style of this game compared to the ancient stuff, though that's kind of just my preference anyway. And that being said, I would absolutely love for another one of these games to be made. Maybe somebody finds the hidden idol in another 200 years or something, and then we get to do the story all over again. These games do a really good job of hiding what the twist is going to be right up until the very end, and I absolutely love that. And hopefully you all enjoyed this video as well. Sorry about missing the upload last week. This one technically should have gone out a week ago, but I was not feeling super great, and I just didn't have time to get the video done. But we should be back to a mostly normal schedule now. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please feel free to leave any comments you have down below or suggestions for games you'd like to see me check out, though I'm realizing that this is kind of a stacked year for games coming out that I want to play, so maybe we'll be a little bit pressed. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. See you!